All right, let's go. Hey, welcome to the November edition of Dynamic Discussions. On behalf of our owners, Kurt and Tammy, and the super producer, James Peters, we appreciate you guys taking the time out tonight to be with us. Hopefully we won't bore you. Hopefully we'll get a lot accomplished. And again, feel free to drop questions into the chat. I definitely want to answer all questions that are available, as well as the ones that were already sent in, but especially those who are active with us tonight. I want to make sure that we can give you all the information that you hope to get. So tonight's discussion is about the program design model, the tier system that I happen to have developed 30 years now? 30 years ago. And our vice president of sales, Craig Sowers, was the one who broached the topic because he wanted to hear about how it all started and how the concept became something that now, very humbling to say, is being used across the country and as well as overseas and worldwide. Everybody wants to know when the new book's coming out. That is a project that has some notes that's moving in that direction. But I keep telling the publishers and I keep telling everybody, if the original book keeps selling, why do I got to write another one? But there's too much more information. There's courseworks and stuff that are looking to do with this new work. But so there'll be some new information coming out. I can't give you a date because writing is a very tedious process. But how did the creation of the tier system, or what even spurred the thought process to create it's unique in certain ways, but it's still lifting weights. But how did the process occur? I'll tell you what, it's very simple. I got my first, what I would call, I guess it would be my real first position in college at Boise State University in 1991. As a graduate assistant. I had done 2 years as a high school strength coach and football coach and wrestling coach at a prep school in Florida. I knew at that point in time, my aspiration was to be a head strength and conditioning coach at college. So I went back to my alma mater, Wake Forest, for 6 months and worked there as an assistant, knowing that I had to, at that point in time, the way the profession was moving and the steps you took to get to be a head strength coach, GA was the route you had to do. Like it was GA and a master's, because mostly everybody back then was asking for a master's plus 2 years of experience to get your next job. So it was kind of the incremental path that most of us took. I have been championing now for a lot of the younger generation of strength coaches, because the master's is a little bit tougher to get because a lot of Power 5 schools don't offer graduate assistantship. So that's a story for a different day. So when I arrived at Boise State, and if you guys are not sure what everybody's experience level is as far as years in the game, in the early 90s, college strength and conditioning was a lot different than it is today. The head strength coach oversaw the entire department, ran all the sports, and generally the staff was one graduate assistant, maybe two. There were very few full-time assistant strength coach positions available in the early 90s. So it was myself and Coach Ron Thompson to oversee. I believe at that time we had 17 sports, and they count track and field and cross country as 6 sports. So we probably had more like 14, because indoor and outdoor track counts as 2 different sports. So we probably had about 14. And at that point in time, when I arrived, I was, for the most part, a full-time assistant working on a graduate assistant salary and going to school. And I was to oversee the majority of the Olympic sports. So I oversaw volleyball, women's basketball, gymnastics. At that time, the gymnastics coaches were writing the program. I oversaw and helped supervise track and field. We had a legendary track coach, Ed Jacoby, one of the best jump coaches in the world in the 90s and throughout the early 2000s. He wrote the track program. I helped implement it at that time when I first got there. Men's tennis, women's tennis. Who else? Wrestling, golf. Am I missing anybody? Men's and women's basketball. So I oversaw a lot of the Olympic sports. The very first two sports that I really got my feet wet within were volleyball and women's basketball. Our women's basketball coach at the time was June Doherty. She had arrived, I think, a year or two before I got there, and she had worked. She played at Ohio State, so she played at a high level, and she had come from Stanford working under Tara Vanderveer. And back in the 90s, Stanford's women's basketball was about what UConn is today and what Tennessee was a decade ago. They are one of the most prestigious women's basketball programs in America, and they just won the national title recently, so they're making their move back. And at that point in time, everybody has to remember strength and conditioning as a whole in the early 90s was still only about 12 years old. Let's remember the NSCA really didn't come to fruition till 1979. So you're still in this come up phase of strength and conditioning, and people still trying to figure out what it was all about. And at that point in time, the truth is a majority of the Olympic sports, when those coaches got involved with strength and conditioning, you were getting old football programs. I mean, that's what it was. They were just giving out old football programs, and you were training all the other sports with an old football program. And because June's experience at Stanford and the things they had accomplished over there at a high level, and it wasn't that she challenged me, but again, I come in on my first meeting, and here I am 2 years out of playing major college football, and a year out of trying out for the World League of American Football. So, and I'm a power lifter, so I'm 6'2", 315 pounds, and here comes this ex-football guy walking into the women's basketball meeting, and I'm sure right off the bat she's probably saying, "Here we go again." And one of the things, and I don't think she was doing it deliberately, and I really don't, because we had a great relationship. Her thing was, I'm just tired of getting the old football programs for my women's basketball team. And it was just in passing. And the truth is, I get it. I mean, I don't believe in sport-specific strength training programs, but when you're seeing the same thing the football players are doing, and they're asking you to do the same thing, I get it. So I took that to heart. Luckily for me, I was exposed to high intensity training at a pretty significant level because my college strength coach was a high intensity training advocate. So when I was in college, and as well as when I was in high school, we did a variation of that. And my high school produced Dr. Ken Leisner. If you don't know him, he is one of the high level HIT guys. He actually, I think he even created what I call now the hybrid HIT, because he used a lot more free weight type of movements and implemented strongman way earlier than anybody else. But the high intensity movement was generally machine based. The Arthur Jones, Ellikin Darden, Dan Riley principles of the Nautilus machines, tempoed work, train muscles, specific muscle groups rather than movements, get the muscles strong, and then do one set to momentary muscular failure. But the whole principle behind that workout, when you really look at it, was a whole body routine. So you hit, head to toe, toe to head in an HIT program. So that was one genre of strength, and they had their group of practitioners on this end. And then you had the standard 4-day split guys who were predominantly your free weight oriented approach. And some people would sprinkle in the Olympic lift. So you would generally see a typical 4-day split, lower body, upper body. And then depending on how versed the strength coach was in the Olympic lifts, they would throw a clean on one of the lower body days, a hang clean or a snatch on the other lower body day, and a push jerk or a split jerk or a push press on the upper body days. And you would do a traditional exercise order of fast lifts first, strength lifts second, ancillary lifts third. Then there was the group that was predominantly Olympic lifting, and they were pretty much training athletes with a sport. So they were using the principles and the training methodologies and the systems of what was being produced out of USA weightlifting directly into the components of their structure for their athletes at the schools they worked for. And fortunately for me, I had a powerlifting background, had an HIT background, did not have a Olympic weightlifting background. Again, coming from an HIT program, we were not exposed to very much Olympic lifting. As much as our coaches wanted it done, it was on our cards. We were not required to do it when I played. So I was not exposed to the Olympic lifts until I got to Boise State. And I was fortunate that the two people who mentored me in Olympic lifts, one was Mike Conroy. If you don't know that name, Mike was the #1 youth coach at that time for USA weightlifting. He's still involved in a high level. He was running a lot of their sports performance coach courses and their USA Level 1 certification courses back in the day. But Mike was a Boise State graduate, and he ran the weightlifting team out of Meridian High School. So Mike came down and taught me Olympic lifts and the variations of the lifts. And then we had a competitive lifter, a math professor that worked out in our facility called Darby, that worked at Boise State. And I got to train with him, and he taught me hands-on the Olympic lifts. So I learned the Olympic lifts and the principles through two pretty good people, one a practitioner and one a high-level coach. And I got my feet wet that way in the Olympic lift. So now I get exposed to all these modes of strength. In high school, two of my friends became professional bodybuilders. So I trained with them. So I was exposed to all the strength disciplines, some of them more earlier than others, but in my coaching career at a fairly early age. One thing that I think in this day and age that hurts a lot of this generation of strength coaches, they're not studying all the methods and modes of strength training. They get locked into what they've come up as, they get locked into what they read, but they're not being what I would call more diverse in the history understanding of programming. If you do that, you may find yourself creating a model of programming that people will soon prosper with, as I was really fortunate and humbled enough to stumble upon when all I wanted to do was do better for the athlete. So that kind of gives you a little bit of this base of where programming was. So my next goal was, okay, so how do I make this old football program look different than what they're used to seeing? Well, the first thought was, well, why do they have to lift 4 days a week anyway? Like, what's the 4 days, 3 days, 6 days, 9 days? But the truth was, I just didn't see that there was really any merit for the women's basketball team to have to lift 4 days a week. So right off the bat, a 3-day-a-week program, regardless of what exercise I used, was going to be different than a 4-day-a-week. But do I go that route when I'm thinking it from an athletic standpoint, where, hey, you train, practice, you use your entire body to move? So to me, it was, why wouldn't I write a program in the weight room where the entire body is being worked in the same session? These are very generic, non-scientific based. This is just, to me, common sense. If I play a sport and that sport requires me to do all these activities, why wouldn't I do something similar in my strength training program? Because again, remember, everybody wants to talk about sport specific this or specificity that. Well, to me, that's kind of specificity. If we're going to use our whole body in practice, we're going to use our whole body in the weight room. And that was a principle that I had learned from the HIT philosophy, because regardless of the fact that they trained individual muscle groups, they trained the entire body. I mean, if you're not familiar with a standard HIT program, it goes like this. It'll go, you go in and you'll do your neck circuit. So you're going to do trap, neck, posterior shoulder. Then you're going to do nautilus pullover, compound chest, compound shoulder, tricep extension, curl. Oh, no, excuse me. After neck, you're going to do your leg circuit. My fault. You're going to do 15 reps of leg curl, 20 reps of leg press, 12 reps of leg extension, 15 heel raises. And then we started doing dorsiflexion. Then we went into the upper body rolls. Sometimes we do hip and back, nautilus hip and back. And then we always finish with negative chins and dips. And we do 1 round or possibly 2. But in those reps, that was the rep rates to fatigue. The goal was to reach momentary muscular failure at around that 10 to 12 if you're doing leg extension. Most of the upper body stuff was all 12 to 15s. The leg press was generally 20. Sometimes we'd push it to 50. So that was a whole body approach. I believe that. Like, that to me made sense. If I'm training athletes, why wouldn't I train them the whole body? On the other hand, though, I like the big structural lifts. I like squatting. I like benching. I liked overhead pressing. As I understood at that time what the Olympic lifts could mean to an athlete, I believe there was high merit in doing some variation of the Olympic lifts. So that's where it became, how do you fit these process? How do you create a whole body plan with utilizing all the supplemental movements you need from a protection standpoint? About that point in time, it was what I would consider injury prevention, and then build the process out where you had the structural movements to bring up the high levels of strength and speed and power. So this is where, when people ask me how it came approached, the approach came from understanding all the disciplines of the strength sports, knowing what components they all brought to the table. Because I think that when you're heavy on one type of training, the athlete misses out on the other. So that's where I had to look at the components of the different strength sports. And when I talk about the different strength sports at that time, it was the 3 big disciplines: Olympic weightlifting, powerlifting, and bodybuilding, because each of them had different components. And then their number one factor of what the type of strength they developed, every athlete needs that. Every athlete needs some type of explosive component to be successful. Every athlete needs some type of maximal strength to be successful. And everybody needs increased lean body mass, not so much size, but increased lean body mass to be successful. Well, when you look at the 3 strength sports or the 3 strength disciplines, each one of those gives you a unique component that is their high level goal and objective. Well, if all those need to be brought in, if all of those have a unique objective, it's hard for me to justify just using one of those strength sports program design models and give that to the athlete. And that's why I don't believe you can train a sport with a sport entirely, but you need the sports principles and systems combined with the others to factor in to give yourselves an opportunity to be successful. And when I say that, you got to remember, back in the day, like Olympic weightlifting, it was all generated for competition snatch and competition clean and jerk. And a lot of traditionalists would only use a certain percentage of the clean and jerk to make their back squat max. So if you clean and jerk 300 pounds, back then, they would only train your back squat off 120% of that. But what about if that kid could actually squat 500? So all these principles of Olympic lifting, powerlifting, and bodybuilding had to come into play. So how do you mix that around? Well, again, now you're looking at it from the standpoint of, okay, I've converted to a 3-day-a-week program. So right off the bat, I'm going all in on whole body. Now, how do I take these 3 dynamics of sport and create this whole body approach? Well, I looked at it from several different means as time changed. But at the point, the Olympic lifts, which at this point in time, I classified as the explosive lifts, because this was before Louis Simmons hit the scene and we learned about like dynamic effort intent. This was just straight based off explosive movements, strength movements, the old heavy, moderate, light system. These are all the general components of how we all started back in the 80s and 90s and the late 70s for some of the people that paved the way for myself. This is how everybody looked at it. It all derived from the strength sports. Just that whatever your discipline was, or whatever your high level component of thought was, that's how you were writing programs for your athletes. It had nothing to do with anything of, if I'm an Olympic guy, I'm writing Olympic lifting programs. If I'm a powerlifting guy, I write powerlifting programs. If they hired a bodybuilding guy, they wrote bodybuilding programs. And the truth was, because it was such at an infancy, and we all know structure is better than unstructure, you were going to have some type of success. And then as the coaching, the strength and conditioning position grew, people began to understand there's different dynamics that also need to be fed. And that's where the hybrid 4-day split came, where those individuals would use the strength work and then they would tack on the Olympic lifts. And at that point in time, it was always train the fast lifts first, and the exercise order was fast first, strength second, ancillary third. That was understood in the theories of weightlifting. My issue was, every coach I know is going to tell you they want to be fast and explosive at the end of games. And if we look at it from a metabolic standpoint, if I'm always training the fast stuff first, how do I know if they can retain or maintain some type of explosiveness under and again, fatigue is a word that people shy upon, but as the game and the duration of the game gets into the late third quarter and fourth quarter and the end of the game, how am I supposed to know from a metabolic concepts if my athletes can retain this amount of speed or strength and power that they've accomplished early on in the game without doing some type of variation of exercise order that puts a faster type of movement towards the latter part of a session, and see how they respond. These were just, to me, common sense questions and trying to find common sense answers. The common sense answer was, well, what if I move a variation of an Olympic lift or an Olympic variation later in the progression and see what happens? And to be honest, I got smashed on that by the typical aficionados of the NSCA and all the people who believed in, you write weightlifting programs like this. And the great part, what I'll tell you is, the greatest part for us as strength and conditioning coaches for athletes are, there is no one way to train an athlete for a sport, because what we do is secondary at its highest level. Depending on how an athlete rates certain things in their development, we are never going to be number one. The sport is always number one. The only time the weight room is number one is if you're a power lifter, a weightlifter, a bodybuilder, a strongman athlete, and even then there's events, and then even a CrossFit athlete, and even they have different events outside the weight room. But those 5 sports are predominantly weight room sports. And you can, if you want to tack in a team sport or a collegiate or athletic sport, high school sports, throwers in track and field have a very good transferable trait for strength and power in the weight room. So the question now becomes, how do you get to this point of applying this to a group? And it was simple for me because, again, I don't really have pressure. I'm working at this point in time, the top 2 teams are women's volleyball and women's basketball. So I was very fortunate that I had 2 teams that worked extremely hard. The women were great. I have high regards for all those athletes who were there with me at the beginning. So I didn't have pressure of having to do this or trying to make something up for a football program. And that helps. And the fact that I was making these moves without being like hammered, and I give Coach Thompson a lot of credit for allowing me to explore and be creative. Obviously, the rapport and the relationships with the basketball coach was moving in a very good direction, because now they're like, wait a second. This isn't the football program. And then the volleyball players realized, hey, we're not doing the football program anymore. And so things kind of got into a different, so it wasn't like one day I woke up and said, hey, I'm going to do this program and see what happens. It was really spurred on by a comment by a women's basketball coach, followed by the fact that in the end, what is our real goal as strength and conditioning coaches? It's to benefit the athlete and help them achieve their goals and aspirations, whether it be on the court or off the court, health, lifestyle. You don't think about that then, but the strength, in the weight room, man, there's a lot of things being built that can help you in everyday life. As I got older, I really started to learn that process and wish I would have been able to communicate certain things earlier in my career more related to that as I did later. But the things that we were doing was benefiting them, and the positivity that we were bringing to them and the camaraderie that we were bringing by putting together this plan all tied in to the success that we had at Boise State. And if it wasn't for that spark of interest, if it wasn't for Coach Thompson allowing me to take the reins on that and be creative, I'm probably not talking to you right now, to be honest with you. I mean, that's why I try to be a champion to the younger strength coach, or to those who are willing to listen and be free thinkers, is don't get caught up with what's in the textbooks. Don't get caught up with the individuals who have laid tremendous groundwork for us with books published, but spend most of their time outside of the competitive setting that we spend most of our time in. Because the truth is, you're learning something every day by being on the floor. You're researching every day. Your anecdotal research has more value than anything you're going to read in a textbook, because you're dealing with a real human being. You're not looking at it from the standpoint of, oh, well, this textbook says this and these guys do that. I mean, Matt Ray, most of you guys know, is one of the top exercise science guys in our field. He's working at Alabama now, doing great things. And let me see if I can find this post he did. I talked to him about this 20 years ago, and he just reposted this. Where is it here? Watch it now. I won't find it for you. Here it is. So all the research that's out there that people want you to read and tell you this is how you should train people, but yet none of the subjects look anything or have any similarities to the athletes we train. That research does not help you. I will be adamant about that. So here's what Matt posted on social media. As a PhD student at ASU in 2001, Big House Power told me his biggest challenge with research was the lack of data on athletes, that applying the findings from general population research was unhelpful. 2 decades later into a career in athlete development, and I concur entirely. So it took him 2 decades to figure out what I told him 20 years ago. And that's why I took a beating. I used to tell people in the middle of presentations, I'm the research. What I'm doing every day is evidence-based research. You know what that evidence is? The data that we were collecting every time our guys performed something and it had a transferable trait over to their capabilities on the field or the court. So don't be afraid to step outside the box, or the so-called box that we get pigeonholed in when it comes to writing strength programs. And I'll be the first one to tell you, writing strength and conditioning program is the easiest thing we'll do. The hardest thing we'll do is communicate and learning to build relationship, because I don't care how much technology comes out. If you can't communicate and you can't have human empathy and you can't understand the emotional quotient, it doesn't matter who's got more advanced technology than the other. Because at the end of the day, if you can't talk to somebody and someone can't talk to you back, probably not going to have a very good program. But that's kind of how it all started. I'm going to pull up my screen. I got a few things to roll and we'll answer some questions. And if you guys got anything, we'll roll from there. Share. You guys still got me? Okay, so starting off, we'll go with simply the tier system as a term is based on a hierarchy approach to exercise order. But I consider it an athletic-based strength training program because we are absorbing all the disciplines of strength. We're not hanging our hat on one specific discipline. We've utilized all the disciplines and they are pretty much of equal value. I wouldn't say we are more powerlifting based versus Olympic lifting based versus bodybuilding based versus adding in mini circuits like CrossFit or adding in a strongman medley as a conditioning. I think it's a very well-rounded strength disciplined approach. And that's why I consider it an athletic-based strength training program instead of, oh, well, we're Olympic-based or we're powerlifting based. I think it's given the coach a very good combination of all the different principles and methods and sports that are out there for us to utilize when it comes to creating athletic-based strength training program. And that's why whenever something new comes out or a new training system or a new training modality comes out within those sports, it's very conducive and it's very important that you guys, we all take a look at it and see if there's any applicability and any way we can absorb it into the program that we have. Because again, a stale program will lead to stale results. So a lot of people get confused, and I think a lot of people get confused because of me. I think the way I wrote the book and the way I present sometimes gets people caught off guards. But in the simplest state, the tier system is based off of two things: exercise order and exercise choice. The integrity of the system is how each session is specifically ordered because of the way it was built out from a hierarchy standpoint, from prioritizing different movements, and then cycling had something to do with it. But training cycles do not interfere with the integrity of the system. It is not a training cycle based program. That's why when people ask, hey, can you do 5-3-1 with the tier system? Of course you can. Can you do triphasic with the tier system? Of course you can. Those are cyclical based programs. You can write any program you want and still emphasize the eccentric phase that I believe Cal utilizes. I'm not sure the true terminology of that phase, but it's an eccentric based phase. Well, yeah, you can write that into the tier system. You can write 5-3-1. You can write whatever you want into the tier system. That's your choice. The tier system is a templated approach to exercise order and choice. And that's it. That's the simplest explanation you can get. So it doesn't have to do, and again, when I wrote the text, and I got the text right here because I'm writing some stuff on it, I even go, yeah, I blew that. Now I know why people think it is what it is. Because the thing is, I write a textbook, right? And I call this what did I do? The elite template and the traditional template. It's the same damn template. The only difference is the cycle. So even myself, I even blew it. tell you it's not cycle based, and then I'm writing it about that. So that'll be changed and be a lot easier to understand down the road. Yeah, here's, we talked a little bit about this. The reasoning's simple. I believe in a whole body approach to strength training. I wanted to prioritize the foundation movements rather than always get caught up in that Olympic dynamic of train fast exercises first, followed by strength, followed by supplemental. And the reason why that is when I started, it was big about testing. What's an athlete bench? What's an athlete squat? What's an athlete clean? Well, to me, I felt if from the strength program that should be the priority versus fast, strong, supplemental. So I wanted to make sure that we let off a session with the movements that we tested. That to me had more value when it came to the show of strength from being a strength coach, because I knew I was going to get those variations of movements later on in the workout to, again, see if they can still display certain levels of strength at those typical movements. Athlete development. I'm not training a lifter. If I train, we had a powerlifting club. The powerlifting club did not train like this. We had weightlifters in our powerlifting club that want to do weightlifting. They did not train like this. This is a pure athlete development approach. Now, I think you could probably train some beginning powerlifters on it, but it's not built that way. There's different things that powerlifters need that we need more work. And again, it's a weight room dominated sport. We've still got to factor in running, whether it be conditioning based, linear speed, lateral speed, plyometrics, and practice. The great thing about the lifting sports is the weight room is practice. And then a holistic approach, like we talked about earlier, of really trying to get all the three strength disciplines involved in this athletic based approach. I didn't know that. So here is the base model of what everything comes from or is spurned from. It all is based off obviously the top three tiers, because in the process of what whole body training is, and my definition is, we want to take one lift that represents total body work, one lift that represents lower body work, and one lift that represents upper body work. Those three movements in a fictional math equation added together gives you a whole body approach. The total body movement category is generally going to come from Olympic style lifts and all the variations of Olympic lifts. Now this is where, again, the practitioner, and I say this is the great thing about being your own person. The practitioner will determine where he'll place certain movements or where she'll place certain movements based off what they feel is compatible to the way they define things. For me, the deadlift is a total body lift. Some people may classify it as a lower. I classify it as a total body lift because it's something where it's initiated from the ground with a concentric movement first and very little eccentric work. Trap bar deadlift. I know a lot of people believe it's quad dominant, so they think it's more of a squatting pattern. I don't care. It starts from the ground. It's a deadlift call. I'm using that as a total body lift. The one that we move to total body is hip thrust, because it's a hip dominant movement. So hip dominant movements are going to fall in my belief, into the total body realm. So hip thrust, deadlifting fall into that category with all the other Olympic lifts. Kettlebell swing, it's a hinge movement. Obviously, the kettlebell clean and the kettlebell snatch are variations, unique variations of Olympic lifts. So they would fall into that. So, but again, if you told me you were classifying a hip thrust and a deadlift to a lower body, that's not even debatable for me. That's your choice. That's where you're programming. At the end of the day, the only thing that matters is you and your staff and your athletes understand where the rotations of the movements are, and that's your terminology. I have no issues with that. I just want it to be where you and your staff are speaking the same language. Where if you're working as a staff, and this is where I've had this is another discussion for another day. What's the definition of a staff versus a lot of standalone coaches who just happen to work in the same weight room? So the goal was in the three, and I'll be honest with you, the more and more I learn about developing athletes and protecting the athletes, as much as I still am a big believer in the 5-tiered work, man, I'm getting more and more where after 3 tiers, you can really focus in on some specific patterns for each day. I'm trying to figure out how I want to word that better, but that came about a lot while I was in the NFL. After those 3 big tiers, especially with some of the adaptations I've done with the upper body stuff, it was like, man, when I get to tier 4 and 5, we've already done a lot of these things up in the prep stuff. And we had created some stuff like that there's a lot to be said about sticking with 3 tiers and then how you move the finishing, or what I call the wrap up part of the workout, where tier 4 and 5 is. That could be open for a lot of discussion and chalkboard or greaseboard work with a lot of your people who are tier system programmers, and what I would love to have and that'll be part of my process when I run these clinics down the road. But that's something that I definitely want more input with, because again, the best part about this was I'm fortunate enough that the process came and the thought process came from myself, but over time I've had numerous assistants who have thrown their 25 cents in at this, that have continued to help me spin the wheel and crank the screws. And then as we continue to learn more about high volume work with tendon and ligament strength and dexterity, and how to really work the weaknesses of the protection areas of the body, there's a lot more conducive work that might be able to fit in, that has more merit at certain times of the year than utilizing a tier 4 and tier 5. I did go to tier 7 at one point in time. That was a failure. And that's when we started figuring out we just had to start building out more of the protection plan. But everything became based on, and I'll show you this later on, but everything was focused on the 3, the tiers 1 through 3. So each day of the week, we were going to have a priority movement. Each day of the week had a major movement, and each day a week had a minor movement. And then that also helped me set parameters with some of the basic traditional sets and reps goals that I had for those specific tiers. But again, the truth is, I don't really care when we hired coaches, this was more important than anything else. I don't want to say I didn't care, but whatever exercises you chose, that was your choice. Just make sure they fit in these categories of how we had them defined, and whatever percentage cycles you wanted to use outside the ones that were available to you from our library, that was up to your choice. Everything was based off terminology. This was the key for me, that our athletes were going to be tier system trained athletes, and this was going to be the integrity. What that looked like for each individual coach after we went through our coaching sessions was specifically based off of their background and what they believed that athlete needed, and what they were very, very confident in teaching and being able to relate to the athletes in a positive manner. Now, with that, the exercise pool development, and then we talk about that. So each one of these classifications now has its own exercise pool. What I have found out over time, and I'll be interested to see where some of y'all thought processes on this, is you can write variations of exercises for days. I mean, it's how you can take a back squat and change it into, you got high bar back squat, low bar back squat, you got, tempoed back squat. You can make up whatever you want. Bench press, right? Like for me, I have 6 different grips that I classify as a bench press. So I have barbell bench press grip 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, based off of where the hand position is. You got clean pull, you got clean high pull, you got snatch pull, you got snatch high pull, however you're going to classify your names. But the biggest thing is, as you're going through with your staff, everybody's got to be on the same page with the name of the exercise. Because like I was talking yesterday at Catawba, if you're not in cohesiveness with the staff when it comes to terminology and agreement in certain things, one, I don't think you're a staff, but two is, if you are working together and Coach B goes on vacation for 2 weeks and Coach A has to come in and take over the team, and you're using 2 different terminologies, and you have this exercise you've never heard of, and then I ask the athlete, hey, what's this? They're looking at you like, well, you're the coach, you should know what that exercise is. But it may be a variation of something I call something different. And then here's what happens. Coach athlete B really wasn't on vacation. He was interviewing for another job. And now the head strength coach wants athlete coach A to take over this team. So this team coach goes to him and says, hey, when this guy coached you, how did it go? Well, hell, coach, he didn't even know the card. He didn't even know the exercises on the card. It's simple as that. That's how people lose jobs. So as a leader, and that has to be defined. You guys got me on all these tangents right now. But as a leader, you've got to set the parameters for your staff to be successful, which also shows how you are as a leader. So when it comes to exercise pool development, however you classify your exercises, once you've named them, then you've got to define them, because a clean pull and a shrug pull in most cases are the same. But that's not necessarily means that a new coach coming in knows that, because sometimes people may think it's a high pull. There's a difference between a shrug pull and a high pull or a power pull. So these are things, if you got unique names for things, like a goblet squat is a anterior loaded 2-handed squat, but that's different than a 2 kettlebell squat, because now I've got 2 kettlebells in an anterior loaded position than a single kettlebell. All that stuff, it sounds simple. I can tell you it gets confusing when you have a multiple groups of athletes and coaches working together. So you have to be aware of that in your exercise pool development. So this is one of the biggest reasons why I dropped tiers 6 and 7, is because I was getting more into posterior, not so much but the protection part, or reduction of injuries. And we all know, in generalizations of athletes, shoulder issues and hamstring issues are always at the top of the point, regardless of what the sport is. And at this point in time, what was this, mid-90s, posterior chain was the new nomenclatured word that was going out there crazy. Well, everybody was focused on low back hamstring. Well, if we're going to emphasize that as a reduction area of injury, well, we're having the same issues with the posterior shoulder capsule. And we were seeing a lot in that era of time. I don't want to say across the board. Again, this is where you wish you did have some data, but it was talked through at conferences. There was a lot of subluxations of shoulders occurring. And I think a lot of that was because the snatch was a big movement in the 90s in strength and conditioning. And I know a lot of teams still use it, as was the jerk. And I don't know if freshmen and younger athletes, when they were coming in, had enough shoulder strength overall to do those movements. And we were getting a lot of subluxations in the weight room because of a lack of strength in the shoulder capsule. So right away, when posterior chain became a major factor in program design for athletes, obviously we had to do posterior shoulder. And then I've always been a big neck guy, because the high intensity trainers and the high intensity coaches, that was a high priority in their training before neck training was even popular. I mean, our neck circuit was historical when we were at Wake Forest. I mean, like I said, we started off with neck every day. Seated, nautilus shrug, four-way neck, posterior delt, and then rotary neck, where it was manual resistant rotary. They put you in this thing, crank the head thing, and then your coach would twist you back and forth, and you'd have to fight it manual resistance. So now what I will tell you is, as we were programming early on, we moved neck, posterior chain, and posterior shoulder to the back end of the workout, which back in those days was when we always used to write in before this was, hey, do 100 crunches and 45 back extensions for core. And we all know the stories of, by the time the kids got to there, they were trying to duck out of the room. This was before we all got smart and we had to break out together and teams started doing abs and stuff at the end. But when you look at things from a standpoint of athleticism and what's conducive to success, and again, I'm going to look at it from an importance standpoint. And to me, posterior chain development and the posterior shoulder work and the neck is more important in the protection of the athletes than squatting and cleaning is as far as strength. So as the program evolved, these movements now have become part of the pre-activity preparation. So one of the questions was, when and how is the ideal time to incorporate neck training? I say up front at the beginning of the workout. And our workouts are built on three distinct phases: pre-activity prep, the main session, which would be the tiers, and then the finishing work. And generally, the finishing work would be when we have a 3-tiered approach, and then we're going to do some type of medley work at the end. If we do anything after the 5-tier, that would be the finishing work, or what we call the wrap-up part of the work. But from here on out, neck training is in the pre-activity prep. Posterior chain training, some posterior chain training will be at the front end of the work in the pre-activity prep. That doesn't mean we might not do more at the end. And posterior shoulder is in the pre-activity prep. It's built in now into the neck part. Like I've created what I call reinforcement plans for the neck and head support. So the neck piece now is built very similar to what it was when I was in college. There's going to be some type of trap work. So you're going to have some type of shoulder elevation and depression, or retraction and protraction. Then you're going to have some type of isolated neck work, whether it be with bands, whether it be with a neck harness, whether it be with a machine. Iron Neck just sent me a Iron Neck, so I'm working with that, and I think it's got really good advantage in rotation and diagonal rotation work. And then you're going to finish with some type of posterior shoulder work. So now the neck program in itself is a mini workout within the pre-activity prep. So that stuff has moved up into so that'd be how we do that. And the other question was, would non-contact sports train neck? Yes. Neck training, especially in this day and age of text neck and slouching, neck training, direct neck training, as well as the reinforcement areas of the shield, which is the traps, and the traps go like this. It builds a shield, the traps and posterior shoulder. If you look at an anatomy chart, is ideal structurally for posture also. And if you're a front squatting team or a back squatting team, if you're an overhead pressing team, if you're a lunge team, if you're a step up team, hell, if you do anything from an athletic standpoint, posture is important. Poor posture, poor results. Poor starting position, poor results. So yes, I do recommend neck training for all athletes. That doesn't mean I want certain athletes to walk around with 20-inch necks like I do a football player or a wrestler or even a male soccer player, but you want to do some types of isolative work, some type of direct neck training with all your athletes. So this is the cycle part, and this is how we kind of built it all out. If you're familiar with the traditional heavy, moderate, light, that's how I built this plan. I know a lot of people do high, low stuff with the Charlie Francis method that is more conducive to running. High, low is an interesting process, but generally most weight training work is between 70 and 85%. So it's in that moderate zone. High, low is probably more conducive to absolute sprinting and recovery, but that's a discussion for another day. So in the typical 3-day-a-week process, when it came to writing programs, this is the old Bill Starr, strongest shall survive stuff. You have a heavy day, a light day, and a moderate day. And let's just say I always use the standards of the heavy day would be 85%, 5 sets of 5. The moderate day would be 75%, 5 sets of 5. And the light day would be 65%, 5 sets of 5. But what you find out is, and we'll just say we're doing the typical clean, I've been saying this example for years, but the big three was always clean, squat, bench. So on Mondays, our heavy day. So we're going to clean, squat, and bench in that order, 5 sets of 5 at 85%. Good luck. If you make it through the cleans, it's going to be a tough way to get to the squats. And I only can imagine from a fatigue standpoint where you are with the squat. With the bench. The light day would follow that from a recovery standpoint. The Wednesday would be the light day. This is before dynamic effort method. This is before accommodating resistance. This is before Fred Hatfield exposed us to compensatory acceleration training. This is 65%, 5 sets of 5. In some cases, that might have been too easy. And then on Friday, the 5 sets of 5 at 75% is generally going to be the best quality of work of the week. So my thought was, looking at this traditional model, watching it from fatigue and overall work, my goal was, how do I make every day a solid training session? One's not any harder than the other per se, but every day we go in there, we're getting a quality amount of work, whether it regards to what the lifts are for that particular day. It became very simple. The priority would get the heavy emphasis. The moderate would get the moderate emphasis, or the major emphasis. And then the minor emphasis a day would get the light emphasis. And now if you just use those, now from a load standpoint, everything evens out. So you've got your heavy emphasis of the day, and then you got your moderate emphasis of the day, and then you've got your light emphasis of the day. And then by rotating the foundation exercises with different variations of supplemental lifts, now you're attacking the body part at a different angle and or movement, and you're building the variability needed to train multiple muscle groups within the same body category in different movement patterns that allow you to give significant results for the athlete. I've got a bunch of, hold on, let me see what I got here in the chat. All right. Can we get a copy of the slides and the notes? Yeah, I don't mind sending this. And then, yeah, okay. So then, yeah, I'll send this over to James tonight, and he can send it out on an email for you guys. Or I even have the emails. Who was that? Brian L. Does everybody want the slides? Yes. All right. Guess I have to give them out. So now here is where I got myself in trouble. So now I get exposed to being a competitive powerlifter. The best thing about being a competitive powerlifter for me in the 90s was I subscribed to Powerlifting USA And guess who I stumble on? Louis Simmons starts writing articles. This is what most people would consider. I didn't even know I was doing it anyway with the heavy, moderate, light. But the truth is, most people were doing concurrent or conjugated or undulated, whatever you want to call it, was doing that approach, and we didn't even know it because the nomenclature was just you were just training. I believe in a lot of Louis' principles, and I think a lot of it transfers over to sport, and I think a lot of it transfers over my capabilities as a tier system aficionado. Excuse me, I went backwards. Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. So I look at it from the standpoint of the three methods of strength that Zatsiorsky mentioned in his book, Science of Practice of Training. And it relates to the three major emphases of strength that I want to develop: maximal strength, explosive strength, and lean body mass or hypertrophy. Within that, you have the maximal effort method, the dynamic effort method, and the repeated effort method. So going through this process and then realizing that in an undulated fashion, you can either do weekly undulated or daily undulated. So in that case, you have 1 week you might do max effort, the next week you do dynamic effort, the third week you do repeated effort method. And then similar to the heavy, moderate, light, on a daily undulated plan, 1 day would be max effort, 1 day would be dynamic effort, and 1 day would be repeated effort. What I created and didn't even know is I created a session undulated plan by utilizing these three methods of strength within the same day. The only difference is that each one of these methods of strength represents a different movement. So in a typical baseline type of strength training program, if we go on the first box, on the first graph, where maximal effort is the key component to raise, I'm going to do a power clean that day, and that's going to be for the highest percentage load possible, whatever that is. So we'll just say we worked up to 85% was going to be the training percentage for the maximal effort work for that week. Then dynamic effort method, I may be doing a front squat to a box, and the emphasis is on dynamic effort or rate of force development or moving the bar as fast as possible under the laws of inertia, as well as knowing that I've got to decelerate at some time. That's where the accommodating resistance principles help by allowing me to stay in acceleration longer. And then the repeated effort method or the lean body mass work will be the third emphasis of the day. And we'll either be able to raise or retain that based off of how the principles are, fashioned. If I'm trying to raise all three of those every day, that is pure concurrent. So that's why I'm a modified concurrent. And that's why in one of my presentations, I've said, if you really stop and look at all the different terminologies of periodization that's out there, we're using a little bit of all of it. And that's where I feel like my principle of periodization is called intermixed, because I'm kind of cherry picked everything and thrown it all together and stirred it up. So then you'll see. So at this point in time, maximal, I would tell you, I'll give you a little look at each of these phases. And let's start from the box. So say, I'll show you how I use this in practicality so you can get an idea. We'll use football. I mean, obviously that was my key sport towards most of my career at the end. And we're going to do a 9-week summer program. I believe in volume work early on in conditioning. A lot of people don't. I do. I mean, I'm not going to get into that fight. So I'm always going to look at what my goals are from the conditioning program first, and then build the strength program. So if I'm going to do a higher volume of work on the conditioning portion of the runs, and I still do linear development and lateral development within the week, but the conditioning component is longer duration conditioning, then I wanted to try to match what the goal of the weight room is. So at this point in time, I'm going to increase the repeated effort work. So the volumes of the priority lifts are going to be higher at this point in time. Because of that, I still want to retain maximal effort work. And I definitely, and I may want to raise that too while I'm here at tier 2, but I definitely want to retain my speed component. So the dynamic effort would be the third priority of this phase, because the higher volume work, is number 1. Now I move into that second phase of training. Some of the goals start to change a little bit in the running, and so does the emphasis in the weight room. So now I want to get into a process where maximal effort work is now the priority for that cycle. Now I'm getting closer to the season, shorter duration work. We've reduced the duration. I got to start picking up the explosive movement stuff and the speed stuff in the weight room as much as I can. I'm going to raise that as number 2. And then the repeated effort method. Now I've got to maintain lean body mass. So I've got to continue that. And that's going to be priority 3. Then as I go into the season where I'm doing short explosive change of direction, short explosive sprint work, dynamic effort becomes number 1. Maximal effort comes number 2. And in this case, I would be training high volume cluster work, because that's our conditioning test in the weight room. And I still need to continue to raise or retain my lean body mass. I don't want to lose lean body mass. I want to maintain or retain as much as I can. And if I can raise it, then I'm winning. So you can see where you have a session undulated work with a concurrent scheme. And during these months, I'm rotating exercises, so you have some of that conjugate in it. And during these weeks, I'm using a linear progression wave for the strength work. And in some cases, there's really no block work here. Out of all the periodization, where block would be specifically maximal strength across the board for 4 weeks, that ties a lot into linear too. So there's not a whole lot of block work in the tier system approach to developing a training cycle for your elite level athletes. There's definitely, you can do block, but again, block fits if you're a block periodization guy and do, was it intensification, accumulation, and transformation, or I believe are the 3 major phases that they use, or the 3 major cycles. Again, cycles don't matter. So this is how I created the undulated approach and the concurrent approach based off of the 3 methods of strength development, which is no different than, strength endurance, explosive strength, and absolute strength. Am I making sense? And that's how I've continued to write programs all the way through my entire NFL career. And I will continue to look at these types of processes moving forward with a couple of ventures I have, training some single athletes. But to go back to the very beginning, this is the second part of the plan. The biggest part of the plan is getting your exercise pulled together and your exercises that are going to be your go-tos. Because what I found is for as much creativity as I want to have when it comes to exercise choice, you're gonna find out, and again, everybody's going to be different, but by the time I got done in the NFL, there was probably 30 exercises that we were using year round. And they just cycled through, like we just knew what the cycles were. Just cycle through. At certain times, it might be a 31st, but for the most part, I could build out the entire year off of 30 exercises. I've got probably, I don't know, I don't want to say 1,000, but something ridiculous in my exercise pool. And now I was looking at an older version of the exercise pool. It's so old that kettlebells hadn't even come into play yet, hadn't even circled back into a weight room. And now you got center mass bells. And now what Kabuki come out with those tri-bar bells. I mean, golly, there'd be 1,000 different ways to do it, a old school dumbbell bench press now with all the different loading parameters that are available. So you got the exercise pool is the key, and then the variations that come off that, and then find your go-tos. Like for me, I'll tell you this, a number one go-to for me in the Olympic variation is a snatch grip power pull below the knee and above the knee with a high full extension pull. I want them to get as tall as they can. I call it almost like a scarecrow finish. I want them up on their toes, hips extended, elbow at perpendicular to, is that parallel to the ground? Yeah, parallel to the ground with the lower arm perpendicular to the ground. That would be an ideal finish position for me with the snatch grip power pull. The only athletes that I would teach the snatch to at this point in time, I keep going back and forth though, because I really think I figured out a snatch progression that I like, but the only one I would do at this point in time is throwers. Oh, shoot. And that's something to, but again, that's, don't let, here's the other thing I'll tell you. Don't let, if you have a specific thought in your mind that you think has a lot of merit and you're seeing it work with the athletes you work with, don't let someone talk you out of it. Have the wherewithal to know that what you're doing with your athletes is working, and hopefully you'll find somebody with an open-mindedness to listen, and maybe they'll be able to throw their 2 cents in a positive way. That's one thing that I've learned, having taken a chance and gone outside the norm in the 90s. When I got battered, I don't want to say crucified, I got beat up when I turned in my first article to the NSCA Journal, when those guys were all Olympic lifting aficionados, and I've got a hang snatch as the third exercise of a workout following a squat and an incline. Think about that as your first article you're ever submitting to the Strength and Conditioning Journal of the lead association in your profession, and you're getting hammered. That went over real well in the office, I can tell you that. But you know, just here's what I'm going to tell you. The only thing that matters is the feedback from the coaches you work with and the athletes. The only thing that matters is the results that are being driven. Obviously, success on the court or the field is number one, but then their KPIs that you're using in your programming will determine if your program is showing enough value from an athleticism standpoint. If you got 30 kids on your team and you go through a testing session and 85 to 95% improve, then we've got to figure out what did we miss with those few athletes. If you go through 30 session, if 40% or 50% of the kids improve, you need to evaluate your program. That's the only thing that matters. Not somebody trying to tell you that this article says this article says that. That article is subjects, isn't your subjects. That's why I said you guys are doing unwritten research every single day you go to work. And then you just jot your notes. You look at the movement plane. Some people think you should just train the muscles. I think there's a huge amount of learning you can do going to practice. I think even to this day, when I look at programs, there's not enough emphasis on frontal and transverse plane movements, especially in the lower body. Not enough lateral lunging or lateral step up work or transverse lunging and or some type of crossover step up or getting into the transverse plane. We have, and I'm a big fan of protecting the sagittal plane. I think that's very important. I think you have to master a split squat and a lunge forward and reverse before you can do a loaded lateral lunge. I mean, I just think that's kind of the build out. But that doesn't mean when you're on the field, all your relative strength and your block zero strength, you should be teaching the entire, what I call the entire lunge matrix. Starting with isometric holds into in-place movement, into cadenced forward or backwards movement, and then into cyclical movement. So these are things that all build out on your exercise pool. The layering process of the exercise pool is going to be one of the most funnest things you can do as a staff. Here's a front squat. Okay, great. That's our goal. We want to be a high competent front squat team. How are we getting there? Go. I think we should do goblet squat. Well, I think we should do Frankenstein squat. I think we should do this. I think we should do this to start. Man, that's professional development. Professional development isn't reading a book. Professional development is throwing darts at a board with your staff or going out and teaching technique to each other and going through the processes of how that's going to better my athlete. Yeah, I read a boatload of books. I got stacks of them. I was the first coach, if not the first coach, that recommended Patrick Lenciani's work to most of the strength coaches out there. I believe in reading books that have nothing to do with strength and conditioning and read about leadership and organization to build your teams. But at the end of the day, the best professional development is in-house professional development with your staff, program design workshops, and learning exercise technique and learning communication to coach, and then go do site visits. The best learning you can do is go visit coaches in their rooms, watch them coach, watch them design, talk shop. That's the best part of my job now, is visiting all these schools and getting to watch workouts and learning what these young coaches are doing, and especially when it comes to some of the technology that's out there right now. That's how you learn. That's how you have the opportunity to figure out one day you're writing and you're presenting on your program design model that's very unique, and you're gonna and people are gonna either jump aboard on it, and if they don't, what do you care? Your athletes love you. I wrote this for no other reason than that. And then it was doing so well, my assistant said, hey, you need to write an article for the NSCA Journal. So I did, and I took a beating, but we believed in what we did, and the people at the NSCA, some of them championed me to finish the article, so I finished it. Several years later, we were still making some tremendous amount of progress and showing a lot of success with the kids, and the next thing you know, hey, you need to write a book. All right, I'll write a book. I don't know how many people are going to buy it, and all of a sudden now, it's something that is a very, like I said, it's very humbling to be spoken about in some of the ways that some of the people that I respect at a legendary status, like the Boyd Epleys of the world and the Vern Gambettas of the world and the Alva Meals of the world, to be in that principles that people talk about my programming for athletes like that. But I took a chance, and that's the thing is, man, bet on yourselves. Bet on yourselves. Do not be afraid to bet on yourself. That's for sure. When I was at the Carolina Panthers, Scott Ocko was an ex-football coach. We were talking about things, and we were talking about the program. And I thought this was really what resonated with me with the tier system, with as many people have had success with it, with the numerous places I've taken it with and have been able to make it repeatable, is all businesses' goals are based on the developing a model that is repeatable. If it is repeatable, it will be sustainable. If it is sustainable, it will be successful. That's what you have to, regardless if you do tier system, regardless if you do 531, regardless if you do West Side template, regardless if you train Olympic based or whatever you want to call it. Can it be repeatable wherever you go? Can you sustain the progress that you've made with other athlete you're working with? And if you can, then you've done something that's successful. I'm going to end with a couple of questions that these guys didn't even show up, but I'll answer them anyway. A 4-day tier program. Obviously, I didn't build the tier system to be a 4-day-a-week approach, but I did play with it in 1990. What year was that? Let's look. 1995 or 96. I messed with it and did not like it. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. I just did. I wasn't writing the right exercises. It was too much work. I call it a gas tank approach. It was, if you got a 20-gallon gas tank, I was writing a 25-gallon program. You can't do it. It took me, I always thought there was a way to do it because I always thought throwers needed to lift more, but I didn't want to sell myself out and do a traditional 4-day-a-week split. And luckily for me, my son was a high competitive Division I thrower, and he was home with me during COVID. And, you know, throwers are a unique breed. They love throwing far and they love lifting weights, more so than football players. And I continued to look and figure it out. And I finally figured out a way that I would recommend a 4-day-a-week split tier system. But here's the kicker. You got to commit, the athlete and the coach has to commit to going to work on Saturdays. I think that's the only way I could sell it to myself. I still think that if you were, the only people I would even contemplate doing a 4-day-a-week tier with is offensive linemen and throwers. Defensive linemen, I don't think need the extra day. Offensive linemen, probably even maybe, but even then, I still don't. I think football players have more field work that they need, that I wouldn't invest another day of lifting with them, because their stuff compared to a thrower from a conditioning and a volume of running during the competitive year is so much higher. So for a 4-day-a-week split, my recommendation is Monday T1 with an emphasis on a pulling Olympic lift, so a clean or a snatch. Wednesday would be squats, so session L. Friday would be session T2 with a jerk or a push press emphasis of Olympic lift. And then Saturday would be session U, the upper body day. And now the key is when you're looking at it, you have to be very aware of what that's going to look like, because so if I'm going to do a session T with a push press on Friday, that's okay. I can get, or a push jerk. I got to be conducive that remember that I'm going to bench on Saturday. So right away you're thinking, okay, well, why don't I just switch and I'll do the jerk on Monday and the clean on Friday? Hey, that's a good coaching. Then you got to look at the lower body work. So for me, we did rear foot elevated on Friday, set tier 2, and front squatted on Monday and back squatted on Wednesday. We did rear foot elevated on Friday, and we did a pistol squat on Saturday, tier 3. The reason why I did the jerk on Friday was because my son's a hammer thrower, and bench press is not a super important to hammer throwers. They need to get very long and protraction to lengthen the lever arm. So we did a dynamic effort hang clean with a complex. So on Saturday it was bench, and then it was 8 sets of 2 of hang clean with a max effort vertical jump every 30 seconds. So it was 2 hang cleans, 30-second rest, 1 jump, 30-second rest, 2 hang cleans, 30-second rest, 1 jump. So it was a dynamic complex. Then it was pistol squat, and then it was some ancillary stuff to finish off the Saturday. So that's the way I would do the 4-day. As far as the conditioning would be very similar to what I always recommend. Monday, linear speed component, lateral speed on Friday, and conditioning, some type of conditioning on Tuesday, Thursday. If it's throwers, then it's lift, lifting, probably some sprint and plyos on Tuesday if I wanted, or practice. So the conditioning could be a lot of different ways. And then all alternatives to Olympic lifts, you got dynamic effort method nowadays, because you can any exercise can be trained explosively based off intent, load, and time. So you can definitely do dynamic effort deadlifts, dynamic effort hip thrust for Olympic lift, kettlebell swing, similar things like that. Programming tips for Olympic lifts: you don't have to do the full lift. You can get away with shrug pull, clean grip shrug pull, clean grip power pull. Trap bar shrug pull is an ideal movement. It's very efficient from a biomechanics standpoint, from where the center of gravity sits. And you could do trap bar jumps. A lot of people do a trap bar deadlift jump. I'm not a big fan of squat jumps just because of the axial loading. I prefer to do a trap bar jump instead. And you can do weighted jumps and med ball throws. So I think that is the last question. We talked about the neck early on. Does anybody who's been with us have any questions before we wrap it up? Nobody? I gotta go through.
I have a question. Aside from the pairings that you recommend with the tiers, have you ever supersetted other exercises, say with a tier 1, that wouldn't affect, I guess, the outputs of that tier 2?
Yeah, it's a good question. So here's what I've done now as I've got more into when we first wrote the system up, everything was based off prime mover of sport. So the truth was, because I still had to play this game of the 4-day work week with football, Tuesday was a session, auxiliary session. So that's where all the antagonistic work came into play. So that's where all the rows and all the extra shoulder work came into play to make up for all the volume we didn't get in with the prime moving and the pressing that we were doing at that time with the session, with the U block, the U tiers. As I kept moving forward, and as coaches didn't get too crazy with 1RM testing and turning in a massive amount of results, we started building a lot of that into the upper body tiers. So right now on tiers 1, 2, and 3, specifically for upper body, you're always going to start out with a horizontal row. Or, excuse me, depending on what the exercise is, it'll match the row. So if it's a horizontal press, you'll horizontal row first. If it's a vertical press, you'll vertical pull first. And generally that's going to be, I know a lot of people go 2 to 1. That's going to be a minimum of +2 to +5 reps a set from what the push reps are. So say if I'm doing 5 sets of 5 on the bench, I'm going to do a minimum of 5 sets of 8, or 5 sets of 8 to 10 on a row. But so now I'm going to go row for 10, bench for 5, and then I'm going to, depending on where we're at, I'm going to throw in a posterior shoulder with it. And if you're programming a lot of, like, I know another way to look at it too, if you're writing your cycles with it to kind of help balance things out, I do a lot of Prilipin stuff when I cycle. So I'm going to have a lot of work sets at the same load, 5 sets of 2 at 82, 8 sets of 2 at 82. So I have a specific formula I use for the warm up, or the prep, what I call preparation progression sets. So that's generally going to be 4 prep sets to get to that 82. And a lot of times we'll do the rows, the press, and then the posterior shoulder in those prep sets. And then I'll drop the posterior shoulder for the work sets and just keep the rows going. So if I'm doing, say we're doing 5 sets of 2 at 82% at for the bench. On those 4 preparation progression sets, it'll be a certain percentage. It'll go 8, 5, 3, 2, but the rows will still be 8s. So the rows will go 8, 8, 8, 8, and the posterior shoulder will go 15, 15, 15, 15. And then when I go to the 5 sets of 2, we're probably going to do 5 to 8, depending generally, well, probably 5 or 6 reps of rows to the 2 reps of bench without the posterior shoulder. If I'm doing a lot of things now, to tell you the truth, because of tempo work, and I'm doing a lot of these mini circuits, what I call medleys. So like, for example, I'm doing a lot of posterior chain hinge work and posterior chain knee dominant work. So say I'm going into like a tier 5, for example, or even a tier 3, depending on where you're writing it. I may do a posterior chain medley of knee flexion work where I would do, say, a Nordic leg curl for 6, into a glute ham raise for 8 to 12, and then for a banded seated leg curl for 25 for 3 rounds. So yes, you can kind of, and that's more with some advanced athletes once they've kind of graduated through your levels, depending on how you write your programming. I mean, everybody, when I first started, everybody did the same thing, and then we realized that wasn't helping anybody. So some of that medley stuff I save for my like juniors and seniors when they've gotten that work capacity and they've been through our program long enough. But I'll do some like hybrid stuff, like a cool hybrid, like a tier 3 might be what I call a hybrid 6-10, where I'll do six reps of heavy step ups followed by 10 reps of lunges. So there's definitely some creativity of adding things like that into the tier. But again, I save that for the higher level athletes to challenge them and refresh their boredom from the standard training that they got as a freshman. And then their sophomore, they start getting introduced to some things. But when they're in that junior and senior levels, I want to, because what I use, and this is why I like Prilipin, is as they get older, I'm reducing the volume of the heavy stuff, but I don't want to reduce overall volume. So I've got to pick that up. So I pick that up with the ancillary stuff. And so where like in level 1, they may do 4 sets of 6 as step ups at tier 3, but on that squat day, they're doing, 10 sets of 2 at 88%. Well, now 2 years later, they're doing 5 sets of 2 at 88% of that on that squat day. So now I can say, all right, we're going to do a 6-10 extended of step ups and lunges, or a lot of hybrid work. Like one of my all-time favorite sagittal plane hybrid work is a reverse lunge right into a step up. I mean, that'll wear you out. So I think that's some of the things to answer your question, where there's value in looking at how you compare, and a lot of that's with the ancillary work. Like you don't want to play too much around with like your heavy squat session or a heavy clean session. They kind of got to be standalones, unless you may work some TKEs in the prep of the squat, and you might want to do some jumping with the prep sets of a clean. But unless you're doing a real contrast type of work with the clean, if it's a heavy clean day, you want to just focus on clean. I tried to sneak too much stuff in, and I realized, hey, certain movements, you need to just focus in on those movements. With some of that ancillary stuff, I think the beauty's in the eye of the beholder, and going out there and being creative, as long as it makes sense and there's some type of continuity between the movements. I think you easily got a shot to add as much. Again, it's all going to come down to the most crucial factor of anything in programming, is how much time you got. And sometimes in that, there could be more sense, instead of doing 4 sets of 6 of step ups, to do 2 sets of 6 with a 10 add on 10 of lunges, because now you get 2 plane movements and you're still getting the same amount of volume, and you've added another variability of movement into the planes. So again, it all starts with time, right? And then it becomes, okay, what level is the athlete at? What demands can I place on them? Anything else? We good? Okay, well, we appreciate it. James and I will figure out what we're going to do next month. I think we may have a guest. I think we're trying to rotate. But we appreciate everybody's time. And as usual, we're here for you on behalf of Kurt and Tammy, our owners, and James Peters, the super producer. We appreciate you guys spending the last couple of hours with us. If there's anything we can do for you, please reach out. James has been very, very efficient on getting these back out on YouTube within 1 or 2 days. So this will be on the Dynamic Fitness and Strength YouTube site, probably within 48 hours, man. I don't know how he does it with everything else he has on his plate, but he knocks that out pretty quick for everybody. So with that being said, again, thanks a lot. Words with it. Have a great night, everybody.